203 goals, 627 games, one Stanley Cup, and a final shift no one knew was final. Nathan Horton didn't retire. He didn't get cut. He didn't even limp off. He just played a regular game in April, drove home, and his career was already over. He just didn't know it yet. Neither did anyone else. Before the silence, there was noise. In June 2003, the Florida Panthers used the third overall pick of the NHL draft on a teenager from Welland, Ontario. Two names came off the board before his. Marc-Andre Fleury first, Eric Staal second. Both went on to win Stanley Cups and play more than 1,000 games each. Horton was supposed to be the third name in that sentence. He looked the part, 6'2", 229 pounds, a right-handed shot with a frame built for the corners and hands soft enough for the slot. Mike Keenan, who signed him for the Panthers, compared him to Mark Messier. Scouts compared him to John LeClair. Nobody compared him to a player who would disappear. He made his NHL debut as an 18-year-old. By his fourth season, he was scoring 31 goals. The Miami Herald started calling him the king of overtime after he scored 2 overtime winners in a single week. He was doing exactly what a third overall pick was supposed to do. What he wasn't doing was playing meaningful hockey in May. Florida missed the playoffs every single year he wore their uniform. 6 full seasons in the league before he ever skated a postseason shift. He kept producing for a team that kept missing the playoffs, and the trade rumors started early. Then, in June 2010, the Panthers shipped him to the Boston Bruins. He was 25 years old. For the first time in his career, he opened a season with real teammates around him. Patrice Bergeron, David Krejci, Milan Lucic, and Tim Thomas. A coach in Claude Julien who actually had a system. A roster built to win games in June, not just survive until April. This was supposed to be the part where everything came together. It did, until it didn't. The moment that defined Nathan Horton was already coming. The Stanley Cup he was about to help win, he would watch most of it from a hospital bed. The first thing to understand about the spring of 2011 is that Horton was the reason the Bruins made it to the final at all. Round 1 against Montreal went 7 games. Game 5 was tied late in the second overtime when Horton put a puck past Carey Price to keep Boston alive. Game 7, 4 nights later, also went to overtime. Horton scored that one too. 2 overtime winners. Round 3 against Tampa Bay went 7 games. Game 7 was scoreless into the third period. Horton scored the only goal of the entire night. Boston was going to the Stanley Cup final. 3 game-winning goals. 8 goals in 21 games. He had never played a postseason game in his life, and he was the most clutch player on the ice. Then came June 6th, 2011. Game 3 of the final. TD Garden. The Bruins were down 2-0 in the series and had to win at home. 5 minutes into the first period, Horton skated through the neutral zone with the puck, slid a pass to Lucic on his left, and kept watching the play develop. His head was still turned when Aaron Rome left his skates. Rome was a journeyman defenseman, 4 NHL teams in 5 years. He had never played a Stanley Cup final game until this series. The hit landed shoulder to head more than a full second after Horton released the puck. Horton went down and didn't move. Trainers ran out. He was strapped to a backboard with his neck immobilized, lifted onto a stretcher, and rolled off the ice while the building went silent. The Bruins played the rest of the game possessed. They scored 4 goals in the second period and 4 more in the third. The final score was 8-1. Players said afterward they were playing for him. Mark Recchi told reporters there hadn't even been much of a speech between periods. Just, let's do this for Horty. The next morning, the league suspended Rome for 4 games. It was the longest suspension ever handed out in a Stanley Cup final to that point. Mike Murphy, the NHL's senior vice president, said the lateness of the hit and the severity of Horton's injury both played into the decision. The diagnosis came down in the afternoon. Severe concussion, out for the rest of the playoffs. The Bruins won the next 2 games at home. They lost Game 5 in Vancouver. They won Game 6 at home. Game 7 was in Vancouver, and before the puck dropped, Horton walked out to the center ice and poured a small bottle of water onto the surface. Water he had taken from the ice in Boston. A superstition, a way of bringing his rink into theirs. Boston won that game 4-0. Horton's name went on the cup. He celebrated in a suit instead of a jersey. That should have been the worst moment of his career. It wasn't. The Rome hit wasn't the injury that ended him. It was the first one in the chain. January 2nd, 2012. Boston was playing Philadelphia. Tom Sestito caught Horton with a hit to the head in the second period. Second concussion in 7 months. Horton missed the final 36 games of the regular season. He tried to come back for the playoffs and couldn't. The Bruins lost in 7 games to Washington in the first round. Horton watched again. He came back for the 2012-13 season, which was shortened to 48 games by a lockout. He played 43 of them, missing the final 5 games of the regular season after a late season injury. The Bruins reached the Stanley Cup final for the second time in 3 years and lost in 6 games to Chicago. Horton had 7 goals and 12 assists in 22 playoff games. 3 of those goals were game winners, including a pair in Game 1 of the Pittsburgh sweep. After Boston was eliminated, the team finally made it official. Horton had played the entire 22-game playoff run with a dislocated shoulder. He had injured it on April 20th against Pittsburgh in a fight with Jarome Iginla. He had not told anyone until the season was over. Surgery was scheduled for the summer. He was an unrestricted free agent. The Bruins offered him an extension. He turned it down. On July 5th, 2013, Horton signed with the Columbus Blue Jackets. 7 years, $37.1 million. $5.3 million per season. Columbus was a young team trying to become a real one. Horton was supposed to be the veteran piece that made them serious. He passed the physical and went under for shoulder surgery the following week. He missed the first 40 games of the 2013-14 season recovering from it. When he finally debuted on January 2nd, 2014 against Phoenix, he scored the game winner. Classic Horton. Then, a goal he scored on March 10th against Dallas became one of the strangest stat lines in NHL history. Horton had put the Blue Jackets up 1-0 in the first period when Rich Peverley, Dallas's center and Horton's former teammate in Boston, collapsed on the bench from a cardiac episode. The game was suspended. When the league rescheduled it for a month later, April 9th, the rules required restarting the game from the beginning, with the score intact. By then, Horton was injured and unavailable. His goal stayed on the official record. Columbus won 4-3. Horton became the only player in NHL history credited with a goal in a game he did not play in. He played one more game after that. April 8th, 2014 against the Phoenix Coyotes. A groin injury, which he later said was caused by changing his stride to take pressure off a stiffening back, ended his season. He went home to Florida for the summer to rehab. The back never recovered. It got worse. By October, the Blue Jackets put him on injured reserve. He didn't have a stall in the dressing room. The team announced a diagnosis that nobody on the roster recognized as something an athlete could have. Degeneration of the entire lumbar region of his spine. There were 5 vertebrae in the infected area. The only fix was fusing 3 or 4 of them together with a titanium rod. Dr. Safdar Khan, who heads spine surgery at Ohio State's Wexner Medical Center, said regular patients could swim and live normal lives afterward. Playing a competitive sport, especially one with body checks, was not something that was going to happen. Horton was 29. No history of back problems. Nobody could explain why his spine had collapsed. He had 6 years left on his contract. In November 2014, Aaron Portzline of the Columbus Dispatch finally got Horton on the record. It was the first time he had spoken publicly since the diagnosis. The quotes ran the next morning, and they have never left the people who read them. I can't stand up like a normal person. I can't bend over. I can't run. I can't play with my kids. To get in and out of the car, I'm like a 75-year-old man. I can't sleep at night. I try to lay down and my back seizes up and I can't move. I'm like a zombie in the daytime. I'm a ghost. It's hard for me to say that at 29 years old, I'm done. I mean, really? Done at 29? He didn't have the surgery. He couldn't bring himself to. The fusion would end his career, and there was no version of himself afterward that could come back. As long as he held off, there was technically a chance. A miracle, as he called it. In February 2015, Columbus traded him to the Toronto Maple Leafs. The deal was for David Clarkson, a Toronto player on a contract the Leafs desperately wanted off their books. Neither team expected either player to take the ice again. The trade was a paperwork move, designed so each team could replace one bad situation with a different one and use long-term injured reserve to free up cap space. Horton failed his Maple Leafs physical that fall. He failed it the following fall. He failed it every fall for 5 consecutive years until his contract finally expired in the summer of 2020. His $5.3 million salary kept arriving the entire time. Reports varied on how much was covered by insurance and how much Columbus and Toronto absorbed directly. Either way, the money kept coming. The hockey did not. He never officially retired. He couldn't in any meaningful sense. If he had filed retirement paperwork, the cap recapture penalty built into long-term contracts at the time would have hit Columbus with millions in dead money for years afterward. So the league let him exist on paper. Toronto kept him on the long-term injured reserve every year. Columbus kept his rights buried in their books. Horton stayed at home with his wife and 3 sons. No farewell tour, no video tribute the next time he visited a building he used to play in, because he didn't visit. The man who beat Carey Price in double overtime, who scored the only goal of Game 7 against Tampa, who poured Boston ice water onto Vancouver's rink before lifting the cup, that player simply stopped showing up to work one Tuesday in April and never came back. Horton's body did everything it was asked to do in 3 different cities for 10 years. Then it stopped, and the league found a way to keep paying him while quietly removing him from view. The records will always show 627 games, 203 goals, and 1 championship. The chance to walk off the ice on his own terms is the part nobody could give back. Most stories about athletes end with a number. A goal total, a banner, a statue. Horton's ends with an empty stall in a Columbus locker room and a contract that paid him not to exist. Maybe that's the part of the sport nobody wants to talk about. The players the game keeps on the books long after it stops keeping them in mind. Drop a comment. Do you think Horton ever got the goodbye he deserved? Or did the league just move on? If this story meant something to you, a super thanks goes a long way, and please subscribe. There's another one coming, and the ending is not what you would expect.